Welcome back to Light the Clock. Today's episode is a bit special because I'll be playing you parts of an episode that we recorded live a couple of months ago in Vienna, back in November 2025. So let me give you a little bit of a background. What were we actually doing in Vienna in the first place? Well, my colleague Marie-Luise is currently leading a science roadshow. She designed a set of experiments on chronotype and light sensitivity, all built into a mobile trailer, and she's been taking this trailer to different cities across Germany. The idea is not only to raise awareness about the importance of light exposure and circadian rhythms, but also to collect data along the way. And it's been so incredibly successful. More than 800 people from all over Germany and also Vienna have already taken part in the experiments in the trailer. Super cool. And one of the stops on this roadshow was Buch Wien, which is a huge book fair that takes place in Vienna every year. Marie-Luise and the trailer were invited there, and I joined her to help collect data. And while we were planning our visit, we were also offered a 1-hour slot on stage. And we thought, why not record the very first live episode of Light O'Clock? So during this live episode, we covered quite a lot. Marie-Luise talked about the work she's doing in the trailer. She also asked me some questions about my PhD and the podcast. And then we opened things up to the audience. People could ask anything they wanted about circadian rhythms, light sensitivity, or sleep. And for today's episode, I'll be playing you some of those audience questions. And in between, I'll also expand on a few of them when I feel there's a bit more to add. And honestly, the questions were really good. We talked about everything from whether you can change your chronotype, how much light we should actually be getting during the day, to the effects of shift work on health, and also a lot more. It was such a nice experience to speak in front of a real audience, because usually I'm just talking into a microphone, alone in a room. So this really felt much more like actually talking to people. One last thing before we start with the snippets. Keep in mind that we were on a stage in a huge exhibition hall with several other stages running at the same time. So the audio quality isn't quite what you're used to, but I hope you'll still enjoy it. Let's dive in.
Yeah, so we've had this little interview between us and a couple of questions. And now actually we would like to shift the focus also to you guys and have a bit of an interactive session with the audience. So the idea is that you raise your hand or you stand up and then you will be brought a microphone and then you can ask questions. And there is no stupid question. Like you can ask anything that is in your mind about biological rhythms, the effects of light and sleep, and we will try our best to answer your questions.
You can also ask in German. That is fine as well.
Yeah, like both English and German are completely fine. We will just answer in English. So yeah, is there anyone who has a burning question already? Yeah?
I can see some fingers.
Yes, so my question is that even if I'm chronobiologically a night person or a morning person, I think environmental factors also probably play an important role when I actually end up going up on a specific day. Maybe I'm a person who gets up early in the morning, tendenziell. But maybe there's a day I go out drinking and partying and then I don't get up that early. Or stress, I think, is a big factor for people that just can't fall asleep because they're stressed and stuff like this. How can you, so to say, filter that out, the environmental factors? Because I think those probably blur the lines a lot, I imagine.
Yeah, definitely. So I think there's two ways that in chronobiology we try to do these things. So one way is that we have studies where we have participants, so people like you guys coming into the laboratory, and we do very, very controlled experiments. And what this means is that people cannot drink alcohol for 5 weeks. People have to go to bed at the same time for 5 weeks. They cannot drink coffee on the day that they come. So we basically, because as you said, so many things can influence our biological rhythms that we have to control for all of these things. And this is super hard, right? It creates like very, very controlled experiments. And then, so this is one thing that we do. We try to control for everything that we can. But of course, these are really hard experiments. And in the end, you think, okay, but this is not how people live. And so we also do experiments where we actually just investigate people in the real world and see, they're not limited. And this is exactly actually what Luisa is doing with the trailer.
So one way you can get around these problems of some person having a stressful day and then taking part in the experiment, or some person maybe just having had a bit too much coffee on that day and that's why he's being a bit different than he usually would be, is by having large amounts of data. So if you have a lot of people, you're testing a lot of people, then these tiny environmental differences that might play into the temporary effect will filter out. Well, it won't filter out, but it will even out because you have larger numbers that will overrun this effect. So this is another way of doing it. So you're being a little bit more broadly in asking the questions by collecting a lot of data. Obviously, then you might not be able to ask these very specific questions like, how does a person sleep at a specific time of her cycle or something? But it can still catch a few effects that might be really interesting that you can then go in and focus in more narrowly.
Yeah, there's another question there.
Thank you very much. So I would have a question. So I think our society is more made for the early birds, I think. So school starts at 8 and work starts at 8. Is there any study out there investigating whether the early birds are more successful in life compared to the night owls, or is there no difference?
There is definitely a research on this. So as you said, like society poses a big disadvantage to night owls, and that starts as early as school. Yeah, if you think about school already then, sure, young children are early chronotypes, but as we said, like adolescents are actually late chronotypes and they have to be in school at 8. So it poses a big disadvantage, and there's also studies that show that because basically during the week they cannot follow their own biological rhythm, then at the weekend they catch up on this leap. And this kind of jet lag, we call it actually, between the weekdays and then the weekend, is actually a risk factor for a lot of long-term problems with your health. And that could be, for example, risk of developing obesity, a risk of mental health conditions, and other long-term consequences on your health. There's a follow-up.
And is there any investigation whether, for example, this also decides which job you later take? So, for example, more creative people are more the night owls, or managers are more the morning birds, or there is no difference?
I don't know, actually. That's a good question. Yeah.
I can add, not about chronotypes, but sensitivity does have an effect on your choice of job. We can see that in light sensitivity, or in actually color sensitivity way more strongly, that when people are very sensitive to color differences, then they tend to choose a creative job, and they are more often represented in jobs that need, creative decision making and, colors, I guess.
I'd like to add something here, because I actually looked this up afterwards. I couldn't find a study that directly investigates whether being an early or a late chronotype influences career choices as such, but there are studies looking at chronotype and occupational outcomes more broadly. In a paper published by Didikoglu and colleagues in 2022, the authors write, "We found that individuals with an evening chronotype have less occupational success than their counterparts with earlier chronotypes, ultimately being less likely to be employed in jobs that are viewed as being of a higher standing in society." End of quote. There are also other studies reporting associations between being a late chronotype and less favorable occupational outcomes overall. So, of course, even if this isn't saying that late chronotypes choose different jobs than early chronotypes, it does show that social schedules still favor early chronotypes. Okay, back to the live recordings.
Can a person manually switch from being a night owl to an early riser? And if they can make that switch, are there any negative health aspects, like mentally or physically, that they will go through when they try to switch?
Good question. Yeah.
It's not a manual switch, for sure.
Exactly. Okay, I think here it's important to say something which I think we're not often talking about, which is that chronotype and these biological rhythms are very, very, very biological and actually genetic. And so can you change your biology is then the question. And yeah, you cannot change your biology. So if you're an extreme early chronotype or an extreme late chronotype, I mean, you're not going to become the opposite, right? But there's like little things that you can do. And this is, what is maybe useful if you're a late chronotype. So, you might be someone who is naturally tending to go to sleep at 1 a.m. or 2 a.m., but still needs to wake up early because they have a job that starts at 8 a.m. And so in that case, what can you do to kind of help your rhythm shift to an earlier time? You can expose yourself to light. So as soon as you wake up, if you go outside and you expose yourself to light, that is basically a signal to your brain and to your body that it's basically day and it's time to be awake, and your body will kind of naturally start to do all of the things that it does when it's day. And so kind of get you ready, get your cognitive performance up. So like basically helping you to do the task that you have to do during the day. Yeah, so basically I would say go outside as soon as possible when you wake up if you're a late chronotype. And if you struggle with the opposite problem, so if you're someone who wakes up too early, then try to expose yourself to light in the evening or late afternoon, because that will help you to stay awake a little bit longer.
But you can change your chronotype for a certain amount of time, I guess, if you are traveling to other countries where the time zones are very different, and then people are able to switch completely differently. And to answer your question about sort of consequences that may have, it does seem that people that have to go through a lot of jet lag don't tend to adjust as well in their cognitive function as they might do with their sleep. So people could get used to being in different time zones and adjust to according to the light or daytime really quickly, and then feel tired in the evening as you would expect in that country. But they don't feel as alert or just as on the case as they would do in their normal sleep pattern. So it seems that there is a lag in the cognitive adjustment.
Yeah, so in my case, for example, I'm very sensitive to the sun. So if the sun goes down, I feel like I want to go to sleep and I don't want to do anything productive anymore. And I think in winter, it's kind of hard because if the sun sets at 5 p.m., you still have a lot of things to do, but you don't really want to do it. And then you're exposed to light, which then also suppresses melatonin. So I wonder how you can do something against it. Is it bad per se if you kind of are exposed to light during the night, whether that influences your sleep as well? So I don't know. Is it a specific question?
So you're absolutely right that in winter, when the sun sets at around 5:30, 5:30 is not a time where you're like, okay, I'm going to turn everything off and go to sleep in the next 2 hours. This is not how humans live nowadays, right? We use electric light, and I think we should use electric light. And I think if you notice that when outside the sun sets and you still want to do stuff, then you can really use electric light to help you. And so in that case, you can increase the amount of light you're receiving, or even just the brightness of the light. As long as, 3 hours or so before you go to bed, you start to dim down a little bit. And so basically have not big lights in your room before you want to go to bed, but rather a local light, so a bedside table lamp, and just try to have warmer colors. So more yellowy or orange lighting before you go to bed.
Something I want to add here is that we often hear people say they feel less energetic or more tired during winter. For some individuals, this can be quite extreme, and that's what we call seasonal affective disorder, or SAD. There's also a much more common non-clinical version of this, which many people experience and we often refer to as the winter blues. We actually did a whole episode on this topic a couple of weeks ago, where we went into much more detail about why this happens and what can help. So if this resonates with you, definitely go check that episode out.
This is kind of related to the jet lag discussion. So for people that have to shift their rhythms often because of their work, because if they work at a hospital or something, and they often have night shifts, are there health implications long term later in life that if you do that over many years, that you can get, I don't know, heart disease or any other health issues because of that?
So anecdotally, not just in the lab here, when we talk to a lot of people, but also, say, if you look into jobs like night shift workers, pilots who always will move from time zone to time zone, it seems that there is a real dysregulation that can happen in your natural sleep pattern. So people will have told me before that they actually can't really determine their personal preferred sleep pattern anymore. I think there is known effects for long-term health on shift workers. So if you are for many years involved in shift work and always up at night, then it does affect your immune system. It can affect your resistance to certain illnesses. But I don't have any specific study in mind now that I can really quote, but there is definitely work out there that shows that it isn't particularly healthy to be completely switched around. Aside from the social implications as well, so you have something like a social jet lag. If you're always up at night when everybody is asleep, then it will affect your personal life in the social sense, obviously, as well, which is also known to affect your mental and your physiological health.
Yeah, definitely. And I think maybe related to this, we can also go back a little bit talking about reproductive health for women. So actually it is known that, women who are shift workers, actually like this kind of dysregulation or disruption of their rhythms can actually also affect their reproductive health. And so oftentimes they struggle with infertility. And there's actually studies showing this. And actually there's not so many studies on men in this case, where, looking at, for example, whether shift work affects testosterone, also like reproductive health, let's say, for men. There's a question right there. Yeah.
So how much light is recommended? How much light should I use in my everyday life? How bright should the light be and when should I use the light?
Okay, I'm not sure if everyone heard, but the question is basically how much light should we receive during the day? And so maybe some of you are familiar with the concept of for example, with sleep, we have some recommendations that, we should sleep between 7 and 8 hours per night. And so the question is okay, do we have something similar for light? And actually, just recently there were some guidelines on how much light we should be receiving during the day. So when we're awake and we're doing our daily tasks, and that is 250 lux. Now, this number probably doesn't say a lot to you. And so what is lux? Lux is a unit of light. It basically tells you how bright the light is. Probably my bedside table is around 50 lux. And if you go outside, it's thousands of lux, just to give you a little bit of a perspective. And so this is maybe still a little abstract to you. And maybe what we can do together is check if right now we are actually meeting these guidelines for, healthy lighting. And so are we actually now exposed to more than 250? I can measure this with this device. This is light meter. What it does, it's measuring the amount of light that we're receiving. It's quite a cheap device, actually. You can get it for 20 or 30 euros on Amazon. And if now I'm pointing it to you guys, so this is what I am seeing. Can you tell me actually how much lux is there?
It's ranging from 180 and it's going down right now to 170.
So actually, 180, 170, that's actually below the recommended level. So 180 is below 250. Meaning that, my light exposure could be better right now. But sure enough, if we were to do this event outside, we would be receiving more than enough light. And this is actually often, the case when we measure indoor lighting, we're actually not receiving enough light. And, if I had a window here, actually, I think I'm pretty sure I would be meeting the target of 250. So having windows already or working next to a window already allows you to get quite a lot of light.
And just funny to add, in our lab here, we are investigating. I don't know if who of you was actually part of our study just over there in this lab. I do recognize some faces, so you can lift your hand. So we are there looking into light sensitivity, and I was really struck by the fact that there was quite a few people who were really sensitive to our light exposure experiment with tearing up eyes and feeling very uncomfortable in our light. And compared to other events, that seemed to be a higher proportion of people here than on other events. And I was thinking, is it the book readers or is it Austria? But it might actually be the fact that it's way darker in here than as you would come in from outside. And so the contrast between this hall and our light experiment is, in a negative way, very strong. And so people might actually feel just that the adjustment is not very easy to manage. Whereas if you come in from sunlight, you might actually feel less affected by this experiment.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting observation.
Just came up with that.
Okay, any more questions? Yeah, a question over there.
I've got a follow-up to the light exposure. The 250 lux is a minimum target for keeping our body activated? Or what's about the 250? Is it like the optimum or a minimum target?
Minimum.
Yeah.
It's a minimum, but actually, so these kind of recommendations I was talking about, they were written for the first time in 2022, so like around 3 years ago. And I think already some studies have shown that this is really hard to reach for people who work indoors. Of course, if you work outside, you're going to reach that easy. Or if you go for a hike, easy, right? But I mean, in our daily lives, most of us are not hiking in the mountains. And so, yeah, then it's a lot, maybe some of us are, it's a lot harder to reach this target. I think the work that we as scientists also need to do is maybe also coming up with strategies that people can use to reach this target during their daily life. And I mean, one that's quite an easy one in like maybe not now that it's winter, but you know, in autumn or spring is just have your lunch outside with your colleagues. This already gives you around 1 hour. Even if it's a bit cold and, you know, you have to put your jacket on, that already gives you a lot of light exposure.
And that was already the last question from the audience. So just to wrap up, this was a super fun experience for me, which I would love to repeat at some point and maybe also in other formats. It was so nice to exchange ideas and experiences with the audience and also being able to answer some of their questions. Especially since as scientists, we often have the feeling that there is so much more that we need to know or that we need to do to get to some conclusions. And we just feel like there's always further evidence that we need to support our claims. So it feels nice when you can answer some questions with a certain degree of certainty. So yeah, I'm really grateful to everyone who came by, asked questions, and stayed to listen. And of course to Marie-Luise for inviting me to be part of this roadshow in the first place. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you next time here on Light O'Clock. You have been listening to Light O'Clock. This podcast is produced by me, Caro Guidolin. The podcast team includes many of my amazingly supportive colleagues and lab members. Manuel Spitzchen does the scientific fact-checking, and music, mix, and sound design are done by Ingo Bednarek. Show notes and additional resources are created by Maidel Fernandez Alonso and myself. Our social media team includes Lucien Bickerstaff, Nilufar Tabande, and Zara Alkaf. And Anna Magdalena Billa is our test listener. Light O'Clock is a podcast produced by the Translational Sensory and Circadian Neuroscience Unit, and we are supported by the Circadian Mental Health Network, the Viscom Prize from the Deutsche Gesellschaft für Psychologie and the Deutsche Gesellschaft für Psychophysiologie und ihre Anwendung, the Max Planck Society and the Max Planck Institute for Biological Cybernetics, and the Technical University of Munich.